Dana Stein, delegate from Baltimore County.
Paul Pinsky, I lead the energy administration.
Excellent, thank you. And now, in the interest of time for everyone participating remotely, I'm going to sort of read all of our commissioners who are present on the Google Meet. I see Ann Lindner, our co-chair. I see David Lapp, our People's Counsel, welcome. I see David Smetic, one of our MGO representatives, welcome. I see our Public Service Commission Chair, Fred Hoover. I see Secretary Kurtz, DNR, Secretary Addix of MDA. I see Administrator Mark Belton. I see Mike Powell, Secretary Flora, Dr. Gilden, and Secretary Strickland. Have I missed any commissioners on the line? Okay, welcome all. We've got a good turnout today in the room and online. And so I'll turn to our chair for introductions.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. It's good to see you all again, our second quarterly meeting. It just seems like it's so much time in between the last time I see you all in this body, and I actually miss you all. So I'm really happy to see you all. I'm also delighted to say that we have several new members joining us today, and I really would like to just give you all an opportunity to just introduce yourselves a little more than you did when we did the roll call. I'm going to start with Jamie Rowley, President of Maryland Farm Bureau. Are you here?
I believe he's online. And I'm sorry, Jamie, I missed you on the roll call. I believe we see you online.
That's quite all right. I do some of my best work when nobody even knows I'm there. Thank you, and good morning to everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to participate on the Commission on Climate Change and to represent our farmers around the state. We've had some very interesting and cutting-edge procedures and best practices that we're implementing to help with this issue, and are working together to help reach our 60% goal by 2031, I believe the date is. And I quite frankly hope to stick around to see if we make that. So good morning to everybody and glad to be here.
All right, good. Welcome. Happy to have you a part of the group. Russell Strickland, Secretary, are you here?
I am. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, and we're looking forward to participating. Obviously, the climate affects disasters, and we're very much interested in how we can maybe divert some of that for the future, so we are a little bit more survivable, build our resilience, and a little bit more sustainable. So again, thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, Bernardo Morales Wilhelm.
Yes, that's fine. And hi, everybody. I forgot to say this is also my first meeting, and I became president of MCCC just 3 weeks ago, so I'm 3 weeks in. Super excited to be part of this group. Indirectly, I mean, years ago, before I came to MCCC, years ago, I was at the University of Maryland College Park I was colleague with my dear and good friend Russ Dickerson here, and I was part of the scientific and technical working group. So I've been over the years more or less involved from that perspective. So I'm looking forward to learning it now from the full commission perspective. So thanks for having me, and I really look forward to learning more what's going on.
Very nice to have you. Happy to see you again. Comptroller Brooke Learman.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Madam Secretary. Hello again, everybody. So Brooke Learman, State Comptroller, really thrilled to be here and appreciate the legislature and the treasurer's support for me to be here. Really excited about the work that we're doing in the agency, certainly focusing on climate and focusing on resilience. We have on board the agency's first ever climate resilience director in Kim Pezza, who I stole from MD. Sorry. Thank you. We're delighted to have her and really trying to bring awareness around the fact that the investments that we make need to be sustainable with every, contract that we approve through the Board of Public Works, thinking about how those are in line with climate solutions now and best practices in terms of building a more resilient state. Also, really want to congratulate MDE and the state on its successful application and awarding of grants through from the IRA through the EPA yesterday. So we're really excited about the work that we're doing in the agency and want to make sure that we can be supportive of this commission to the extent that we can provide information, analysis, moving through the years. We want to really play a key role in helping you all and this body do the work that it needs to do to build a more resilient state. So thanks so much for having me, and I look forward to listening and learning.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And last but certainly not least, Fred Hoover, Chair of Maryland's Public Service Commission. Are you here?
Good morning. Similar to Comptroller Learman, the General Assembly passed a bill last session to add the Public Service Commission as a member of the Climate Commission, and I look forward to working with all of you to help meet the state's goals when it comes to climate policy, and look forward to having the Public Service Commission be an active participant in all of those efforts.
Well, thank you and welcome to all of you from all of us. This is the best commission in the state of Maryland. We have a good time here. You will find that to be true as we go along. So yeah, this is great. We need all of the energy and ideas and, just the contribution from every single one of us in this commission. So I'm happy to have us all here today and to get started on our second meeting this quarter. It is really an exciting time in terms of climate action in Maryland, and I know we all know that. The comptroller just mentioned yesterday, EPA announced the award of 2 grants from the EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, totaled about $130 million in new state investment. As you all know, we have a climate ticket on the climate plan. We estimated about $1 billion per year in order to really fund this climate plan. So any money that we get in, like $130 million, is amazing, right? Yeah, let's. We applied for more than that, but that's okay. I think we applied for 430 million.
Approximately 400.
Yeah, but we got 2. We didn't know. We were very skeptical. Well, we were hoping to get all 4, but it was a very competitive process. I'm still just shocked that we made it through because of the competition. So I'm very happy. I think we were the only state, I believe, who got two of them. Is that true?
Potentially, we're checking on that.
Yeah, we're trying to brag. So yeah, 80 million of it will come through MDE and MDOT to deploy electric vehicle charging infrastructure for commercial zero emission medium and heavy duty vehicles along Interstate 95, the corridor. This is part of actually a larger $250 million multi-state grant with Connecticut, Delaware, and New Jersey. And then the other is MDE, MDA, and DNR. We're going to receive $50 million to advance natural carbon sequestration through improved forest management, agroforestry, and the protection and restoration of highly threatened high carbon coastal habitats and forests. And this work is part of a $420 million grant with North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, and the Nature Conservancy. So again, this is huge. And so congratulations to us. So today, the agenda that we have, we're going to pick up on 2 items that we did not have time to cover the last time we met back in April. So first, we're going to hear, in terms of those updates, we're going to hear an update from Dr. Bill Dennison on what STWG has learned from methane and hydrogen. Where's Bill? Oh, there you are. You're ready for that, right? All right. And second, we're going to hear from our staff at MDE, and we're going to talk about the status of this commission's new working groups. We talked a little bit about that again last time. We just weren't able to really finish that conversation. And then we're going to talk about the exciting new executive order on climate change. And I know all of you have heard about it and probably have some questions about it, particularly when you think about that executive order, the sub-cabinet on climate, how that relates to this commission's work and efforts. And I think we need to have a little conversation about what that means. And then we can talk about the priorities too that we have going forward. So there's a lot that we have to cover today, but I know we'll get through it. For you new members, usually we don't. But we're going to try. We try every meeting. I try to move it a little better, and so that we can get through things. It's just that there's so much energy in this room and in this group that it's just hard sometimes to even get everything done. So now, Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about methane and hydrogen. You have 20 minutes, by the way.
Yeah, last time I think you scheduled 15 minutes, gave me 3.
I gave you 3.
I appreciate that I'm earlier on the agenda this time.
Yes, we're being fair this time.
I'm over in the cheap seats here where Chris Fogel says I belong. But I'm here to give- we've been meeting on a monthly basis with the Science and Technical Work Group. I covered woody biomass at the April meeting, but today I'm going to talk about hydrogen, and then we've had a series of talks about methane. So next slide, please. So the hydrogen story was Johns Hopkins professor Jonah Erkbacher works interestingly in industrial applications. Next slide. He introduced to us that hydrogen is, you got to talk about where you get the hydrogen. To be able to use hydrogen as a fuel cell, in a fuel cell or as a transport mechanism, doesn't matter. It's how you generate it. And there's from green to black and everything in between. So if you generate hydrogen with fossil fuel, you're really not helping anything. If you generate it with clean energy, you got an opportunity to use that. Next slide, please. So it turns out very recently they've created hydrogen hubs, and we're in a region where we're kind of adjacent to both the Mid-Atlantic and the Appalachian hydrogen hub. And this is funding from the Department of Energy to sponsor this technology, develop this technology. So we're in a good place to be able to do some of this technological innovation. Next slide, please. And the reason we want to explore this is that hydrogen could help us. It's not the end all be all, but it could help us in our journey towards decarbonization. It could accelerate our timeline for the climate goals. It could we could leverage existing and planned infrastructure. We could get statewide access to clean energy, not just clean electricity, because hydrogen can be transported and provide a basis for a new materials economy. So there's some things to do. It's early days on the technology though. Next slide. So here's the big, the chemistry. I think Russ Dickerson is the only one in the room that would really just get excited about this slide. But it's the point here is that if you burn methane, you generate carbon dioxide. You're not really helping out. But if you go through a different process, decomposition of methane, you can create carbon and hydrogen without without any greenhouse gases. You get rid of the methane and it doesn't turn it into CO2. Next slide. So they've done this at the lab scale at Hopkins. They had a nice little video where you do this high energy conversion and it precipitates the carbon. Pure black carbon comes out when you're doing this, and that becomes something that you could utilize as a product. You could, that could be a useful thing, but meanwhile, it makes the methane disappear and turns it into hydrogen and water. Next slide. But, you know, to scale this up, you would need to create a facility, production facility, to be able to make this technology functional. And again, that's where this hydrogen hub funding from Department of Energy can come into play to scale this up. Next slide. So here's Jonah's concept for using hydrogen. So the idea is, well, you know, we all know, get rid of coal, build offshore wind, so you could create, you know, these clean energy sources of hydrogen, reduce the natural gas emissions, use renewables, of course, and develop new economic opportunity for the carbon that you produce, because you're precipitating out this solid, pure carbon. And that has opportunities in an industrial setting to be able to utilize. So that's the story there. I think it's you know, we're going to keep watching this technology as it develops. Next, we started talking about methane. We started with a big picture with a colleague at Cornell, Bob Howarth. I went to grad school, and he's become a shale gas person or fracking. This is his passion, his what he spends his time on. Next slide. What he makes the point is that methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. We often focus on carbon dioxide. That's, you know, we talk about decarbonization, we think carbon dioxide, but methane actually is one of the major warming agents. It's 67% of the warming of the planet compared to carbon dioxide. So it's a big contributor to our global warming. And something that we need to be paying very close attention to. Next slide. And what's happened is, if you look at this time scale, the methane that we're measuring in our atmosphere was starting to level off around 2000, but then you can see an inflection, and all of a sudden we're increasing our methane. And that coincidence was the start of when we started fracking in a major way in the United States. And that's, we felt, now fracking is leaky. There's methane seeps out of that. So there's been a lot more interest in methane as a result of these trends. Next slide, please. Now, fracking is a major culprit. And, you know, a lot of people think of natural gas coming from fracking as a transition, a bridge fuel to get us to our clean energy. But the point here is that because even compared to coal and oil, it's producing a disproportionate amount of methane, this potent greenhouse gas that has a longer lifetime than CO2 in the atmosphere. Next slide. So one of the things people, you know, kind of excuse the methane, say, oh, it's coming out of geologic seeps. You know, in fact, there are places in the world where there are, you know, bubbling out of you know, volcanic areas and such. But when they've redone this and looked at using ice cores to look at historical ice preserves gases for a long time period, and you can go to take these cores and analyze the gas over geologic time, we find that, in fact, geologic seeps aren't really the problem, but there are biological sources, and then, of course, those anthropogenic sources that we're responsible for, particularly fossil fuel burning. Next slide. Bob Howarth makes this point that exporting shale, so we've turned into United States as a net exporter of methane that we generate from fracking, and his point is that that's not doing us any good. We're just pushing the problem, letting somebody else burn it, and that if you look at the data of what's being generated off from LNG, it's not a pretty good picture. So, you know, we have to have some responsibility for the coal and the gas that we export from there. we're trying to decarbonize Maryland, but if we're just sending it offshore, we're not really solving the problem. Bob was very active in this, and he was able, based on his unpublished at the time results, he was able to get the Biden administration to put a hold on the LNG export. So he's very influential in that context. Next slide. So then we started turning our attention, that's sort of the big global view. And then we started turning our attention to methane in Maryland. And we have three scientists that did this. Laura Lapham was from our Chesapeake Biological Lab, looks at methane in the Maryland, in Chesapeake Bay in particular. Next slide. She makes the point that methane produced naturally, it's called swamp gas. Often it's colorless, odorless gas that's formed when organic materials decaying naturally. So in the bottom of the bay, where the sediments are settling, the phytoplankton are settling and the oxygen's being consumed, that's when methanogenesis, that's when methane's formed. And particularly, you can see from the map in the deeper areas of the bay where these quiescent areas where the oxygen is consumed. So the more we help the bay by reducing nutrients, the better we're going to be with methane. So reducing nutrients for eutrophication is a very strong positive, and we're making progress on that. We need to continue and double down on that because it'll reduce the methane production. Next slide. And so Laura looked at this on a seasonal basis, and you can see the oxygen plummets in the summer in the bottom of the bay regularly, and that's when the methane production comes out and gets released. And then she noticed a sort of anomaly in the data. The next slide shows that the good news is there are organisms that consume methane. So there are methanogens that produce it, and methanotropes, the bacteria that consume it. And so a lot of that methane produced doesn't make it all the way to the surface and eventually into the atmosphere, except during storms. So when you have a big storm, it's a big venting event that creates a lot of release of methane. Okay, so next slide is her conclusions is that we're seeing methane fluxes that come out of these organically rich areas. We have these fluxes that are particularly stimulated with storms, and these natural sources are still important. They're not, we can't ignore them. She asked the question, maybe we should be incorporating that into our greenhouse gas inventory. Okay, next slide, we're going to start talking about what we can do about this. And this is one example. This is Stephanie Yarwood from College Park, and she looks at restored wetlands. And the next slide shows where she's, this is your fun fact for today. A teaspoon of soil has 1 billion bacteria. So what we're talking about here is this soil microbiota that does all the methane production and consumption. And so she's a soil scientist that really got into methane through looking at these microbial processes. Next slide shows the places where she started working on restoration. And on the eastern shore, where I live, there are all these depressions that they call Delmarva Bays. It's kind of a misnomer. They're not embayments of the ocean. They're freshwater wetland areas. And they're only like a meter deep and just, the size of this room but there are lots of them. And so what they did is they looked at natural versus restored of these wetlands, because of course a lot of farmers have been draining these. And then there's a lot of restoration efforts that no, we need more wetlands. Wetlands are important, so we go and do these reconstructions. So next slide shows some of these results. Now this is a complicated slide, but what really blew my mind is that the wetlands that are in the orange on the left are these recently restored wetlands. The ones in the blue on the right are the microbial community from the natural wetlands. Okay, so you got natural versus restored, and they're clearly different. And the problem is those restored wetlands are venting a lot of methane. And then the middle, those purple ones, are wetlands that were restored 30, 40 years ago. They still haven't reverted to natural. Meanwhile, you know, that's summer after summer, wetland plants that have grown and died and been replaced. But it's because the soil microbial community is so important. It takes decades to reset that. So that's a real lesson for us when we look at restoration, wetland restoration. There's no magic there. We're not creating it might look the same with the green marsh grasses that are coming up, but they're not acting the same. That's what's important. Next slide. So her take homes are, reading from here, the restored wetlands support higher methane production. Older wetlands are changing, but not very fast, decadal. And if you add, she also looked at if you added manure or wood chips or, you know, amendments to those wetlands to enhance their recovery, it'll make the plants grow better, but that actually creates more methane. So question that she leaves us with, can we do wetland restoration without also creating the problem of methane emission? So we really have to rethink our restoration strategy. Okay, next, Stephanie, another Stephanie Lansing, again from College Park. And we're kind of turning our attention to agriculture. Next couple meetings we're going to do is about agriculture and the effect on greenhouse gases. But this is kind of a bridge because Stephanie looked at methane generated from animal manure. Next slide. Stephanie points out that we've got lots of dairy cattle up in the central Maryland, Frederick County, et cetera, and all the chickens on the eastern shore that we all know about. But the difference is animal manure is not the same. Chicken manure is fairly dry, and even beef manure, cow patties on the fields, fairly dry. And because of that, they're aerobic. You don't get this anaerobic process that creates methane production. Dairy cattle, in contrast, produce a lot of wet sludge that produces a lot of methane. Next slide. So we're generating methane, and of course, cows themselves produce methane. We've all heard those stories about flatulence from cows, but the manure is something that we can deal with, and yet we don't have enough application of technologies. And you know, we've got a great example. Next slide shows an example of an anaerobic digestion that's in Cecil County. So you can see this rubber tent that they put over the lagoon where the waste is, the animal manure, and then you digest it. And when you digest that, you create two things. You create compost, odorless, nutrient-rich compost that you can use with application appropriately, and energy. Enough energy, this thing is produced, that's providing energy for a bunch of houses. So this anaerobic digestion is something that has been applied elsewhere in the world. Germany, had like 6,000 or something, and we have like 400 in the United States. So there's an opportunity for us to build this infrastructure to create this digestion and produce compost and energy and reduce and eliminate the methane loss. Next slide. And here's where those greenhouse gas emissions that she calculated from manure are all concentrated where the dairy, and of course, most of our dairy has been migrated up to Pennsylvania, but we still have dairy in Maryland. And you can see the two counties on the left have this massive production of methane from that manure. Next slide shows what you could do if you were to use anaerobic digestion. You could turn a positive emission into a sequestration. You could turn that around. You could actually reduce, because the negative comes because you're generating energy that you can replace other sources of energy. So there's real potential with this kind of technology, proven technology. We've got proof in Maryland of this as well as overseas. Next slide. And then her conclusions are that we need to get this out there, educate people. For our legislators, we could increase our technology adoption. We need better collaboration between our state agencies, and figure out ways to really incentivize this to make this a standard operating procedure rather than just an isolated example. So I think there's some real exciting things on the horizon there of using technology in a positive way to help us get to our decarbonized future. I think that's it, slide-wise. I do want to point out that the reason we were able to bring in these great speakers and have these great conversations is because I've had Dr. Christine Knaus as our Sea Grant Policy Fellow helping out. This is her last meeting. She's finishing up her year. Fernando's going to be bringing in a new person starting in September. Christine, in addition to doing this climate work, also helped us with our report card release that was a couple weeks ago that Secretary McElwain helped us out in that delivery. And she's an expert on microplastics in the environment, and so we're putting a plastic indicator into our report card. And then finally, I want to advertise that we're going to have a summit on Baltimore Harbor coming in October at our IMET facility in downtown Baltimore. It's part of our Chesapeake Global Collaboratory effort to bring more people in to solve these critical problems. Of course, not just the bridge, but all the exciting things in Baltimore Harbor, the reimagined middle branch and the Healthy Harbor Initiative and all the things that are going on. So we're going to try to bring together academia and businesses and NGOs and agencies and foundations into our conversation. So I'll leave you with that.
So
I did my
Thank
10
you.
minutes.
Well, that was amazing.
Thank you.
I think we have time to open it up for some conversation. First, that was amazing. Yeah, you talked about hydrogen, not just hydrogen, but also the impacts of methane, which we know is the worst, most deadly. So sometimes some of these things we're doing, you can't win for losing kind of situations, right? So you create one and then you have to deal with the next. So anyway, I'd like to open it up for conversation. Please.
Thank you. Bill, in terms of the hydrogen production facility, if we pursued something at fairly significant scale, one, what does it cost and what is the turnaround? In other words, from applying for permits to actually building it, how much of a solution is it? How much will it cost? And when could he do it if he moved in that direction?
Jonah points out he thinks that it's better than to have a large concentrated thing, to have a bunch of small things in general.
That's really the case.
Yep. But I don't know that we've really got the economic analysis of that yet. I think this is still in that pretty preliminary experimental stage.
Are there facilities around the country that we can look at?
No,
We're not there yet.
Okay. So this is,
I mean, at one point,
again, not an immediate solution.
at one point, Toyota was really going, they didn't go for electric, they went for fuel cells. That was their thrust, and they backed off. Of course, they're making electric now. I think Jonah said when he bought his electric car, he realized fuel cells are not going to be the transportation of the future for now. It's just not there yet.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
just very quickly, a technical point that you can use hydrogen, you can burn it to generate heat. You can burn it in an internal combustion engine that works the same way your gasoline powered car does. And that's better than burning gasoline or natural gas, but it's not perfect because you're burning something and it'll make air pollution that'll get us into a smog problem. The next step, as Bill pointed out, is fuel cells, which really are air pollution, climate change free. But that would require a complete rebuild of our infrastructure. There aren't any, it works. Fuel cells are enormously efficient. They use them on the space shuttle and so on. But we don't have a fleet of fuel cell powered cars yet. Last quick technical comment.
Oh, I'm sorry, we had a fleet, not we, but different places in America, like California and all these other places.
They have some,
We didn't have the infrastructure to support it.
right? Yeah, it works. The technology exists. The infrastructure is not there. And so it's not it's a great idea. It's going to take time.
And money.
And the last thing, lest you think the animal waste is a small problem compared to fossil methane, we just published a paper that said the swine lagoons, as they're called, in North Carolina deliver as much methane to rural Maryland as does the Marcellus plus the Baltimore, Washington metropolitan area natural gas leakage. So it is a major source, and this idea of covering the manure piles and using that methane is an excellent idea. It'll pay for itself, and we should encourage that.
And it's also an environmental justice issue because most of these lagoons and methane production is in disadvantaged communities that we should definitely cover it up.
Good, Bill. Thanks for your presentation. Couple of questions. First, your question noted saying, can we restore wetlands without increasing methane? Is there some research that's being focused on that?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think part of the problem when we probed on that question, when you do restored wetlands, you bring in heavy equipment. You bring in backhoes and bulldozers that compresses the soil. And going back to that slide of the billion bacteria per teaspoon, you've changed that matrix. And that takes a long time to reestablish. So perhaps some gentler touches on our restoration technology, just don't bring in the heavy equipment, don't compact that soil.
Okay. Next question is about cows. A few years ago, there've been several news stories about how you change what they eat.
The diet.
Yes. That it reduces their production, their emission of methane. But then it seemed like that research, at least for us in Maryland, didn't really pan out. Do you have any updates about that?
No, that's our series, the next series of talks we're going to do, as well as changing chicken diet. I mean, we're trying to manipulate chickens to excrete less phosphorus.
You can reduce enteric fermentation, but you can't
eliminate it.
But even production, I mean, given the volume of methane they emit, probably help.
Oh, it's a step in the right direction, but it's
Right.
not a panacea.
Sure. And just last point, I'd be interested in learning more about the recommendations on your last slide. So maybe we can follow up on that.
Sure. The other thing, I think the Climate Change Commission's now be posting all the talks and including the recordings. So if you want the full throttle recording, I will warn you with Stephanie Lansing. I normally, when I watch a talk, I speed it up a little bit, 1.25, 1.5. With her, I had to slow it down because it was fast. But there's a lot of great content, and I'm just picking off what I think are the relevant things because you're making decisions about funding and priorities, and I think there's a lot more in there. But yeah, absolutely.
I think we have a hand up from David Lapp online, and then Secretary Addix.
Thanks. Yes, David Lapp from the Maryland Office of People's Counsel. I just wanted to share a comment on hydrogen, and I think it's the fifth slide, which says that hydrogen can leverage existing and planned infrastructure. And I wanted to point out, just so there's no confusion, that infrastructure is not gas utility infrastructure, because that gas pipes can only handle a very limited amount of hydrogen. Hydrogen can be put in, at levels maybe up to 5%, but once you start going higher than 5%, it causes embrittlement issues with those pipes. And so they break apart. There's a really good study recently from the University of California that goes into detail into these problems. So the current gas utility infrastructure cannot be leveraged for this to the extent that infrastructure exists now, because we know the utilities are replacing much of that infrastructure and still have about 2/3 of it to go. Another issue with using hydrogen for anything really is that it's higher ignition than gas. It's more flammable. So you have to be more careful than even natural gas. I'm not suggesting that it's not a good use for some applications, but it's not a good use at any significant scale for our buildings. The other issue with hydrogen is that it's not compatible with household appliances, except in very limited amounts, under 5%, because the volume of gas or the energy content of natural gas, of fossil gas, is 3 times greater than hydrogen. So you need to have, essentially larger pipes, and you would need to replace or substantially modify home appliances for hydrogen to be used. So I just wanted to share that and make sure that there's no confusion as to what can be leveraged, and that does not include in any significant way the gas utility infrastructure.
Thank you. And of course, the Hindenburgs are example of how hydrogen can go very wrong.
Yeah, and if anyone's interested, I can share the University of California study, which really goes into detail of the problems and looked at, potentially injecting greater amounts than 5%. There's some research that says you can do a little bit more than that, but really, because in a gas pipeline system, there's pipes of different types. You would have to have, certain types of pipes spread across the entire system in order to accommodate more than a very limited amount. And that's not what our gas utility infrastructure is built for.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Secretary Addix?
Right.
Thank you very much. Hope you can hear me. I've got a little noise in my earbud here. I just wanted to commend UMCs. I keep learning way more than I feel I deserve, but I'm taking it all in, from not just the research that's happening, but the convening of the research and the expertise from around the world. And then, Bill, you and your team have done something that I have not seen done successfully elsewhere, and that is taking really, really, really complex information and teeing it up for policy folks and for the public to be able to consume, and actually you've made that research actionable instead of just hypothetical, theoretical information on a slide deck. One thing I wanted to point out is that MDA, you pointed out our Animal Waste Technology Fund. We've seen a couple of proposals just in the last year of folks trying to crack the problem of methane production on farms where we're growing food, right? So we need to grow food and produce food. So how do we do it in a way that's mitigating methane, et cetera? And so the methane capture that you've discussed is one thing. We've started to see proposals about using the pyrolysis, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, technology to actually turn it into hydrogen on farms. So not only would we be capturing the methane, but we would be turning it into something that, if everything we've heard here, obviously given the constraints and complications of it, we could be producing hydrogen on these farms, and you think about the farms are generally in rural areas, if we were to build hydrogen depots, they probably wouldn't be in rural Maryland. But here we could have kind of an organically built version. So excited to see the creativity behind this. It's not just our industry that's proposing it; it's outsiders who are backed by funders looking to solve this problem. So thank you again for the work.
Thanks for the shout out. I will say that, you know, we've got to start thinking about these, what we've been considering waste products like manure as resources. And that's really the smart way to be moving forward. So I think there's a lot of exciting innovation. One of the things I've talked to Secretary Addix about is farmers are very climate savvy, and they're very innovative. And I think we need to tap that innovation and creativity in the agriculture community to create sustainable food systems that help us on our climate journey.
Thank you.
Any other questions? This is something that we can think about. I know you brought up the fact that you were thinking about, can this really be a part of the solution? When you think about we're not able to bring it to scale, I think that was your concern, right? So it's kind of hard to think of it in terms of a viable, I guess, solution. But my question, we don't have to talk about it today. We can bring this up again, but I think there are some environmental justice concerns regarding hydrogen and installation and infrastructure and all of those things. So even if we were to think about this a little more deeper, us as a commission, we really have to think about the environmental concerns. And also with DOE putting out so much money, billions of dollars in those hubs.
Big money.
Yeah, but strategically looking at the future, like what does that actually mean though? You know, that's where my mind comes in. But anyway, thank you. Great discussion. It won't be the end of it. Sure. All right. I think I want to move on to you, Chris. You're going to give an overview of the commission's, the 8 working groups.
Thank you
When you're
very
on
much.
leave.
Yes, thank you. And so I'm going to bring another PowerPoint deck up on the screen here. Part of the package for today to talk about the commission's new working group. This was another item that we began discussing during the April meeting and then couldn't complete. So the Climate Change Commission has always had working groups since it began many years ago. Before the Climate Commission was even codified in law, it had its 4 original working groups. The Adaptation and Resilience Working Group, the Greenhouse Gas Mitigation Working Group, the Scientific and Technical Working Group, and the Education, Communication, and Outreach Working Group. Those are the 4 groups that have been part of the annual process every year where they feed up information for the commission to take action. And as we've heard, STWG, for example, is sort of our pipeline for scientific information and new technological solutions to bring before the commission. The Climate Solutions Now Act created 4 additional working groups under the commission. And so we have a big opportunity here in the commission to bring more voices to the table and address lots of specific issues that are part of our overall climate strategy. But we also have, frankly, a management challenge, right? Those of us who have been participating in the commission for many years know that it gets very busy near the end of the year, right? When the commission is digesting the products of all 4 of its working groups. Well, now the commission has 8 working groups. So that's something that we're thinking about carefully. How do we keep that process manageable, especially come this September, when we'll all be sitting in this room talking about what to do in light of these 4 working groups. But they are targeting really important issues that the state needs to work through, and they've brought lots of additional important voices to these tables. So there's a big opportunity here to keep making progress. So these 4 new working groups created by Climate Solutions Now are a little bit different than the original working groups, as we'll see in that the legislature gave them all specific rosters and specific deliverables. The working groups are all working through those deliverables. They have all launched, and we'll be going one by one here with a status update. But that's something a little bit different, right? Whereas the mitigation working group every year decides what are the priorities, what are the most important issues for the commission, and then works toward them. Each of these new working groups has a very specific task to fulfill in state law. Generally, those tasks were all due last December. We had conversation with the legislature about how it took time for MDE to receive new resources, new staff to staff up and launch these working groups. So we did not meet that original deadline, but the working groups are all working toward their deliverables now. So there are 4 of them, and we'll go through them one by one in the slides here. The first is the Energy Resilience and Efficiency Working Group. This is a working group that advises the commission and the state on opportunities related to energy infrastructure, looking at transmission efficiency, battery backup viability, managing the infrastructure behind the clean energy transition. The chair of this working group is Andrew Place, a senior policy advisor here at MDE, supported on MDE climate change staff by Cindy Osorto and the University of Maryland, Stephanie Vo. The University of Maryland is providing technical support to several of the working groups that have studies and analyses to perform. So we're continuing our relationship with UMD's Center for Global Sustainability and other parts of UMD to make sure that these new working groups have in-house technical expertise to help produce their products, and it's very helpful. So this working group has met 3 times in May, June, and July, and it has monthly meetings scheduled through the end of this year. Very active conversations going on about the infrastructure. And in the slide deck here, just a couple of slides later, sorry, they ended up in the wrong spot. Just an example of how the electric energy system works, and importantly, where the line of jurisdiction is between the federal government, especially the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and the work they do with our regional grid manager, PJM, versus state jurisdiction that roughly corresponds to the difference between the transmission system and the distribution system. So this working group is looking across the infrastructure at the challenges we face and how to work past those challenges to manage our clean energy transition.
Yeah, Chris, can I just make a comment?
Yes.
This is great. I just, one thing that is missing from here are the businesses that will disappear or will be reduced. My agency works very closely with our gas stations across the state. We and MDA, of course, not only do we collect taxes from them, but we help monitor and fuel and the everybody. So we work very closely with them, and I know they don't have a spot on this working group, but I think it might be worth at some point, having one of their industry representatives come. We'd be happy to come to talk about, and this is a huge transition for those. Those are all small businesses owned, many owned by immigrants. So it's just something to consider in terms of if this is about small business revitalization and transition to renewable energies effect on small businesses. There are thousands of small businesses across the state that are looking at an uncertain future in the long run, and those are corner gas stations. So also along with that, just the effect on real estate that will have, right, to think about. So we'd be happy to sort of be a bridge and a connector with that industry as well, if it's of interest to this working group.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is that something we could think about doing?
I think so. And we can
Okay.
talk about which of the working groups. There's some
Yeah,
conceptual
whichever one.
overlap and
Yeah.
membership overlap.
Yeah, whichever one.
Yeah.
That just, like it said, small business, and that's what I thought of. So whatever you think is fine with me, of course.
Yeah, great. And so let's revisit that as we go through the
Sure.
additional working groups. And so each of these working groups, as I mentioned, has a roster set in statute. And so the materials include the rosters for each of these. The Energy Resilience and Efficiency Working Group has 13 members. Most of the working groups have 13 members. A similar working group, the Energy Industry Revitalization Working Group, which has the specific small business oriented task that the comptroller mentioned. The Energy Industry Revitalization Working Group would prefer not to be called by its acronym earwig. This working group
That's right.
is looking more at how the transition will affect the industry, including small businesses. Same chair as the prior one, Andrew Place, a senior policy advisor here at MDE, supported by Cindy Osorto on the climate change staff, and Stephanie Vogt from the University of Maryland. This one has also met 3 times. You'll note that it actually has the same meeting dates. These 2 working groups tend to meet on the same day for efficiency. And again, this one is also monthly and has 13 participants. And so the 2 other working groups, this is another one, Comptroller Learman, that is relevant. The concept you described, the Just Transition Employment and Retraining Working Group. This one is focused on workforce development and training. How do we manage the workforce angle and the impact of this transition in the economy on people? Cindy Osordo is the lead MDE staff on this, again, with support from UMD. This working group has also met several times and is meeting monthly through the end of the year. It is a much larger one. You'll see it has, I believe, 33 members. It touches on many, many different topics, many different pieces of the economy and different interest groups. And so you can browse at your leisure the entire list. We appreciate there are many people who serve on multiple working groups in the commission, including the old groups and the new groups, and many commissioners who are serving on these new working groups. We really do appreciate all the time that everyone is putting into navigating all of these issues. So the Just Transition Employment and Retraining Working Group, lots of conversation about workforce and an equitable transition to a clean economy. The final one is about solar panels. The Solar Photovoltaic System Recovery, Reuse, and Recycling Working Group. This is looking closely at the materials implications of solar panels. As we've built more and more solar, there is eventually going to be a growing waste stream coming from that. So getting out ahead of that, how do we manage that? How do we understand what materials are in these opportunities there are to make reuse of the panels, and then the panels that are bound for end of life? How do we make sure that we have the infrastructure to support that challenge? This one is chaired by Tyler Abbott. He's the land director here at MDE. He's my counterpart for Land and Materials Administration, supported by Bradley Baker, our program manager in the land program. And so this is sort of, we're bringing lots of expertise from all of our traditional waste management, materials management functions here at MDE. And this one also has, I believe, 13 members drawn from the different industries that touch upon this, as well as some nonprofit organizations. Yeah, Brad.
I should note that we do have meetings going to the end of the year. And the August one is not the last one, and we can get that updated.
Okay, great. We'll update that for everybody. Yeah. Thanks, Brad. And that's Brad Baker, who's helping manage that work for us. Okay, so the commission is now embarking on these additional topics, many of which have been discussed in the traditional, the old working groups over the years, but now are getting sort of special, renewed, particular focus and new resources brought to bear to talk through these issues associated with the state's broader climate approach. So open to the floor for discussion, questions on these working groups, thoughts on the management question we face here on the commission.
I would say it's a lot of work. So thank you to MDE. Of course, we in the legislature created this, so a couple of years. So we take responsibility for these 2 work groups, but they realize just even getting them sort of getting staffed up and getting the members appointed was a fair amount of effort. So again, we appreciate what MDE is doing.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to address these challenges. Yes.
Well, thanks for the overview. Excellent, excellent perspective. And I'm wondering, I mean, with the existing 4 groups and the new 4 groups, the amount of coordination, goes exponentially, right? And I'm curious as to, hypothetically, there could be a situation where one of the groups moves in one direction and another, which contradicts or goes opposite, or it's not completely aligned with the work of another group. So I'm curious as to what's the coordination mechanism that has been envisioned to handle, the increased size of these groups.
So one thing that happens behind the scenes in the commission is that we have a steering committee that meets monthly, and it's effectively all the working group chairs who all, talk about the agenda for this group, and everyone updates on what all the different working groups are up to and how that feeds into the broader commission conversations. That is our initial starting point for that coordination. And it's our hope that that body can help serve that function, in addition to having lots of sort of shared staffing across the working groups. But that is going to be a challenge, especially, for example, the mitigation working group used to talk about a lot of these issues, and I think, I can't speak for the MWG co-chairs who are on the line, but I think perhaps it's maybe a relief to them that they can sort of set some of these issues to the side and focus on other ideas. But I think that's step one, is trying to be clear about what the lanes are for these different working groups, but then try to coordinate as best we can behind the scenes. I think ultimately we'll have one thing you have to look forward to this year is that this is a September meeting when the commission starts evaluating all of the ideas from all of the working groups. And that's another final fun, I guess, where the commission may decide based on what it's heard from some working groups and others what to advance and what not to. Okay, well, so there's information on each of these working groups on the website, as well as in these materials. Any questions, please feel free to reach out offline.
Thank you.
Finish it. Oh, wow, that was fast. I think it's a good segue into a small conversation about prioritizing what we do in this commission and why it's really important. But right now, I thought I'd just start the conversation about the executive order on climate and the role that the Climate Commission can play or does play. So I just wanted to just go a little bit about what the executive order is about, and then talk about us and how we fit into that picture. So I'm sure many of you saw the governor's executive order on climate. It was released June 4th. It directs a whole of government approach to addressing climate change, which is great. And it essentially brought all the state agencies together so that we can coordinate and accelerate our action towards the climate pollution reduction plan that my agency, MDE, published. When did we publish this? December. Yeah, December. So there's basically the EO directs 23 of the principal departments, but then there's a sub-cabinet that was also created. The sub-cabinet is only 11 agencies who are part of it. But all of us, all 23 of us, are responsible for creating a climate implementation plan. And it also directs all the agencies to look at our operations and regulatory work and all the things that we do, and look at how does all of that impact climate change. That actually was, it's in the EO, but that was required under the Climate Solutions Now Act. So I think it just makes it real that agencies really need to do that. So I do want to make it clear that while that subclimate is really important, and I'm happy that we have it, it is very different from what we're doing here in this commission. The work of this commission is so important. We have a much broader mission and task ahead of us, because we're looking at ensuring that we have robust engagement from all parts of society, and that we're thinking about everything when it comes to advancing progress on our shared climate goals. So what we do is important. And I'll try to make it simple. The sub-cabinet on climate, totally different. Agencies need to create implementation plans, and it needs to be aligned with Maryland's climate goals. We're going to be looking at that. I'm chairing it, so I get to see exactly the connection. So that's really good. But this group it kind of made me think and brings me to, I think we should have a conversation about priorities. We have so many working groups. I've never seen so many in my 30+ year career on a commission. But they're all important. They all have different things that they're looking at. And I just think it's our mission and task to make sure that everything that we're doing is in priority and alignment with what we want to bring forward to the General Assembly and the governor. Because we send recommendations. So I just think we need to take our time and really make sure that we're supporting those work groups, maybe giving them a little direction on priorities, because they come up with so many wonderful, important areas that I probably would not have thought about. But we do need to take our time, relax a bit, and make sure that we're making clear the things that we want to really concentrate on during the year. So I thought I'd open it up for conversation on what would it be like to see this year in terms of recommendations that will eventually go forward, and how can we better support the working groups as well. So I know I was going to just say just quickly, and thank you. I'll turn it over to you. One priority I think that we all talked about last time, the last year we met, and even last quarter, was funding. That's a big elephant in the room. How do we fund the climate plan? It's $1 billion, could be more. But in the $1 billion, just to remind everyone, it's about incentivizing movement, basically. We have all of these regulations that we're pushing forward for buildings. They need money. We need consumers to buy EVs. They need money. We have to incentivize. And so the governor, as we all know, the governor has said it, and I believe in it. We can't leave anyone behind. So how do we strike that balance with businesses, with consumers, and all of us too, as we move forward? So, okay, we're going to open it up, the conversation, the room for a conversation on it now, and you're first.
So first of all, Madam Secretary, you all are doing such incredible work on so many different fronts, and getting this major federal grant obviously does help substantially close the gap. But one way to close the gap is to get businesses, private individuals, faith communities, and nonprofits to voluntarily, outside of legislation or regulation, to take serious climate steps, just like the executive order has asked the government to do within itself. Last year, this commission voted for a public education campaign to encourage people outside government to take positive steps. Unfortunately, the legislature did not pass that important legislation. So I hope that we will again recommend a robust communications campaign to get the non-governmental entities to create their own climate plans and implement them. But I'm wondering, under the context of the executive order, if existing resources inside the government can help move that forward. Because, for example, we had a week last month when 6 people in Maryland died from heat. So is that an opportunity for our health secretary and others to go out and use that moment through the media to educate on what people outside government can be doing? Is that a part of what we can do with the executive order to get the, other people's dollars, time, treasure, talent, to help move our agenda forward?
Okay, thank you for that. And so the way I think we can have a conversation today, so let's think about that example. You brought up a robust communications plan and more public education. So then we would look at that idea and think as a group, is that something we want to prioritize? And if we said yes today, then the question would be to you, Chris, is, so what are the working groups working on? Is that one of the areas in which they're spending a lot of time and resources? And if not, then that would be one of those priority areas we would like, we would speak with that group and say, hey, whichever group it is, there's so many of them. But the commission has decided that we really want to focus on XYZ. So thank you for that. I did want to use it as an example though. Any question about that particular idea as a priority for this commission this year? Communication, better public engagement, a real campaign where we're educating and getting information out in a different way that's more effective is what I just heard.
Can
Any
I just
comment
make
on that?
a comment on that, Secretary?
Yes, of course.
It fits with it. I don't think my co-chair, Kim Coble of the mitigation work group is on, but one of the things I would ask as you consider that, because I think it's a very good proposal and I support the idea. One of the things in the mitigation working group we're working with is what do we leave off if we add something? As I'm sure Chris can tell you, we already have more items on the mitigation working group agenda than we can do this year. And so we started the discussions about what gets deferred to next year. So I just would ask the commission, I support and really hope the commission will tell us what they want us to concentrate on, but just keep in mind that sort of attached to that is what do we defer in order to make room for considerations of this issue. As an example, we've spent a lot of time the last 2 times, correctly, I think, talking about funding, but that deferred a lot of other issues that we could have talked about instead.
Interesting. Thank you. Don't we have an education, communication, what is it, an outreach working group already? Are you on it?
It hasn't been as robust and I would love to see it be stronger.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Any other conversation, questions about priorities? Yes.
Well, with regard to what Jennifer just said, how does this overlap with the work that the MD Green Registry program does and supports businesses with their environmental practices?
Oh, that's, would you have an answer to that?
Yeah, we do have the Green Registry here at MDE and yeah, that's something we could look at is opportunities there. Yeah.
Yeah, if I can. So the Green Registry does support voluntary actions by businesses that want to go above and beyond what the existing regulatory framework is. So just recently, the secretary highlighted a lot of the new businesses that are going above and beyond. So we should continue to try to utilize that group to highlight those examples of leadership.
We'd be happy to help with that. And I bet Secretary Anderson would too,
Yes.
I mean.
Right.
So.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah. If there's ways that we can cross post, highlight, promote different initiatives, certainly happy to do that.
Any other ideas on priorities that we should be thinking about this year? We'll ultimately be voting on? Yes.
That's right. Yep. I'll throw one out. And that's structures for collaboration, both between agencies, but also among local jurisdictions. This is related to financing. I think we learned a lesson with Bay Restoration where the first problem was money, but then the money showed up and throughput became the issue. We found out we had, we know we have almost 200 local jurisdictions. That's almost 200 local procurement processes. Many of them don't necessarily have the resources to get design and engineering and go through all of those steps to actually move the money that we work so hard to obtain. Resilience authorities, we heard about those at this last commission meeting. I think there's a ton of potential there, especially among smaller jurisdictions to share. We have the city-county relationship in Anne Arundel. I think we could have regional collaboration, maybe on the Eastern Shore, maybe in Southern Maryland, to really build the capacity of our local partners to take actions directly with the resources that we're all working so hard to obtain. I know this is on the agenda of the Adaptation Resilience Working Group. Maybe if we could send them an affirmation that this may be something timely for them to consider. I'd put that back on the table from last meeting.
Can I comment? on that?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
So, yay, when you're speaking procurement, you're speaking my language. So we actually, in the Office of the Comptroller, also just released a whole study of Maryland's procurement economy that we commissioned the Drexel University. They have an institute on procurement, and ABLE helped us fund, and other institutes. So one of the issues that we found, and one of the challenges, was we have a very federated procurement economy in the state of Maryland, which is exactly what you're talking about. And this challenge that comes in when both companies are interested in doing work for a government, but also on the reverse side, makes it harder for governments to find any efficiency to procure goods and services that maybe their next door neighbors are doing as well. Now, at the state level, I think our new Office of State Procurement Director is starting to think more about ICPAs, these interstate compacts, that we can use. So MTA just did this to procure its hybrid buses. Actually, they used a contract from another state that had already been competitively bid, but that doesn't really happen at the local level. And we would be happy, like, we think about procurement all day. So we would be happy to work through that work group on some of the procurement issues to bring in sort of some of what we found. Because at the end of the day as well, the Board of Public Works is responsible for all procurement regulations. So if we can be helpful to the General Assembly, if there ends up being state legislation needed, or, at a regulatory level for state regs, and provide some information for local governments, or even just a playbook or suggestions for local governments on how to reduce barriers, I'd be happy to help champion that. So yeah, it's a great idea. It's interesting. Yeah.
I have a question about Stride. Last year, David Lapp made a very important presentation to us about how that's putting the state and our citizens at great financial risk. And he recently released a study showing that things have gotten much worse. Where would we go in terms of which working group to talk about repeal or repair the Stride issue?
The commission did consider that recommendation last year, right? And advanced it, and the legislature didn't, or that the relevant bill didn't make it to the legislature. So that's something that, the commission creates lots of influential legislation that does pass, and then every year, right, we have our April meeting and we look at the bills that didn't pass. So the commission always could take that up again. I think that would most neatly fall in the mitigation working group, where I believe it was originally discussed before being brought to the commission in prior year's process. But Mike or David or Mark could correct me if I'm wrong. But we have also in the commission itself picked up recommendations from prior years that hadn't been implemented yet, and just considered those directly without going through the working groups as a process matter. I think the commission has that option in the fall as well.
Yeah, I think that where we were with the mitigation working group is we were going to go through the list of recommendations we had made in the prior year, but we weren't devoting a lot of the limited time to reconsidering recommendations that, for example, the commission made, because our job, I think, is just to give recommendations to the commission. And if the commission's already made a recommendation on something, we weren't going to spend additional time studying it unless the commission asked us to.
Commissioner Smetic on the phone. Could I chime in briefly?
Of course.
Yes, is that David Smetic?
It is, yes. I apologize for not being there. Poor planning on my part, so I'm in transit at the moment. But Jennifer and it's mentioned, it's something I've been thinking of in terms of priority commission this year, and how we are serving as also a bit of an accountability check on progress throughout the state on the recommendations that we've been putting forward over the last few years. As Jennifer highlighted, one of the recommendations that did not move through the legislature for various reasons is still kind of like in the hopper for things we've suggested as ways for the state to move forward. But that's one example of many. And so, as noted, we've in the last couple of years, just put a little addendum of here are the things that we've recommended in the past that haven't moved forward. We haven't placed a lot of emphasis on that. And I'm curious if this year there's either requests to the working group or that maybe it's something that as the full commission, we need to just take some time to do over the next 2 to 3 meetings of looking at how we are emphasizing kind of status checks on what we have been recommending that have been moving forward, but that remain very, very critical and important. I know that we'll have some new policy recommendations that will similarly be very important this year, or something else. But I do think that a bit of a reorientation in how we are emphasizing what has advanced, what has not advanced, it's important. We discuss it post session, as Mike just highlighted, but how we're emphasizing that in our reports, I think we need to be transparent with the public and the recipients of the annual reports of where we are not seeing the advances that we've been recommending in the previous years. I don't know how that, Madam Chair, how that fits within for priorities, but I think for my accountability check is a bit of a priority in my mind.
Yep, I absolutely understand that. Something to think about.
And I think maybe we'll
Yeah.
put down stride in particular as one of the recommendations that hasn't been implemented as a priority for the commission to pick up again at the September meeting. And discuss and look at options if the commission wants to move it again, to move it in a way that's more visible than, as David mentioned, what we've done before, sometimes where we sort of incorporate by reference the prior year's recommendations that haven't been implemented yet. So I have that down as an item to bring to the September meeting outside of the working group processes.
One area I'd like to bring up, which is so important, which is accelerating new technologies to reduce greenhouse gases. And you brought that up in your presentation. That's an area that I think, I'm just bringing it to our attention. I think it's important that we start thinking about those new technologies in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Particularly when you think about bringing, these things to scale. That is the issue. I mean, nothing is really, well, some things, but bringing everything to scale is what we need to be, I think, really focusing on and thinking of. Think of solar, right? Solar is 1%. I think of the mix, 1% renewable energy. So how do we think about that, like bringing that to scale? What is that conversation like? Because we have all these goals, we have all these mixes of energy. We know what we need, we know what we want, we know what we need to do, but it's those conversations. And particularly when we think about bringing all of these things to scale, we have to think about how do you do it in a lower price range? So not sending businesses out of business, which is not what we're here to do, and thinking about how do we utilize public investments as well, bringing them in more, having the conversation, a real conversation, not just rhetoric, but some real action, some real planning, some real strategy. That's just an idea. So technology, I don't know if we've had any recommendations before regarding really looking into new technologies, have we?
Also for solar and solar scale, I believe it was 2 years ago, the commission advanced a series of recommendations on scaling up solar. And that was, yeah, it could have been 3. Mike, do you remember when we had the multi-part recommendation on solar 2 years ago?
Right.
Yeah, I wanted to say it was 2 years, but you're right, it could have been 3 years. And that was I think one of our primary recommendations for that year that we had said we thought it was one of the first ones we should push. And I think you're right to reemphasize that one.
We can bring that one up. And if memory serves, the legislature did act on one of those, which related to the net metering cap, acted very promptly on that one. And so that could be something for the mitigation working group to consider, room in the agenda to revisit that recommendation, which had lots of parts, and see which ones didn't get implemented and
Yeah, I
still
think
make
that's
sense to
important.
pick up and carry.
Yeah.
I think that's,
Feels like Maryland is the king of pilot projects.
Yeah.
Nothing
well,
ever scales.
I think that's a good idea because if I recall our discussion right, and it's certainly what I believe, it underpins a lot of the rest of we do. I mean, I thought earlier when we were having the discussion about hydrogen, well, green hydrogen is a great idea, but only if we can produce renewable energy. And we got a state that's importing lots of power and about to build another transmission line to import even more power. So I do think re-emphasizing what can we do at least for those parts of the renewable power project line that we can help with, we should keep it on the front burner.
Is it just building off this sort of technology line? Is it worth it, or have you in the past? Because I clearly don't know. Sort of engage. Obviously, we have UMCs is like a real leader in this, but is it worth it to talk to Hopkins Tech Ventures or TEDCO or some of the groups that are really, where I know I saw in your presentation, Bill, there's Etch, I think it was, which is a spinoff at Hopkins.
Yeah.
Right. It's so there must, we obviously do quite a bit in health tech in Maryland and cyber, but to the degree that some of these places are accelerators that they're funding these types of projects or finding a market for it, it might be interesting to just hear how Maryland is faring in that space. Because that's really, if you have a company who can make it commercially viable and they can get backing and funding for it, then you can start to see it come to scale, right? So it would be interesting to see if any, what's in the pipeline, and if, those companies see Maryland as a good place to do business. If they are like, hey, we spin out of Hopkins and then we immediately move to California, it's worth knowing. So.
And we do have the scientific and technical working group. Do you have some ideas on that?
I think that is a good intersection between some of the ideas you mentioned, comptroller and WG. They both working groups are.
I think our recommendations are going to be including these technological.
Okay.
Push towards some technological solutions.
Good.
I can't remember if there's been discussion about carbon storage, the technology of carbon storage. I mean, during the interim, I visited both of Maryland's cement plants. And of course, they emit a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, and they're looking at carbon storage opportunities or possibilities, for example, overseas in Europe that are working maybe more efficiently. So I don't know if that's something that's been considered much here. I know we talk about natural-based solutions, but in terms of the technology.
Do we have are there any conversations about sequestration, carbon in the cement industry?
So yes, we did our manufacturing decarbonization study for the commission that had been required by the 2016 GGRA.
Okay.
That had a big focus on the cement industry, and its recommendations led to the bill that you introduced and got passed this year, which was also a recommendation of the commission last year on including the cement industry. And so we could.
But we haven't moved forward.
Yeah, so the numbers were crunched on that.
Okay.
But I think there's more work to be done on the technology development and deployment side. Perhaps that could be an STWG.
In past years, we've touched on it once or twice. We haven't had a full, like a series like we just did on hydrogen and methane, but we touched on it.
There's some new technology for cement production, less carbon producing. So it's a right topic.
It could be, yeah, now that we have that policy change, and it could focus the discussion on the cement industry in particular.
That's important because it's directly related to us meeting the climate goals, all these little things like, that we're talking about. Any other before we wrap up this piece? Yes.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know where this goes, but just concern about AI and the energy consumption AI takes.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit mind blowing. I don't fully understand it, and related to how we're building our transmission distribution and our data centers. I know we'd had conversation before about that, but I don't know if we deferred it, if it's something that the commission could address in any way or just learn more about. But I'm curious to see if that's a priority of anyone's as we're trying to reduce, our energy consumption and change the way we're using it, the electrification and energy transition, that could outweigh all of our progress.
It's a huge issue.
Any conversation on that?
It's a great point. It's a big deal. And we should, to the degree it's possible, educate ourselves on what's happening and keep up with best practices around the country at least. So,
Cryptocurrencies are a big energy, one of the big pushes of data cryptocurrencies. But we've done some listening sessions around the state of Maryland to get people's input as we evolve our report card. Data centers coming out very strongly. People are concerned.
And thank you. And I see Mike Powell's hand up. Mike, is it about
Yeah.
this data center question? And then Russ?
No, it was actually just one more topic I was going to suggest because unlike almost everything else we discussed, it's something that actually got bipartisan support on the federal level, but I don't think we've ever dealt with, which is small scale nuclear. I mean, we're already a state that depends a great deal on nuclear for our green energy, but I don't think we've ever had a conversation about is there a role for the state of Maryland in the future of that industry, even as it is explored on a longer horizon, of course, elsewhere.
Okay, we'll add that.
Yeah. The list of to-dos for the SCWG is getting pretty long. So I think, Russ, you had something on the data center question, perhaps?
No, not specifically, although I agree nuclear should be something that's on the table and the scientific and technical working group should be thinking about it. But more pragmatically, our group has talked about how to generate hydrogen without generating pollution. But we should get together with people beyond the sciences and engineering to talk about if we could generate substantial amounts of hydrogen to make it an important part of our economy, what would we have to do to store it, deliver it, and then get cars and trucks with fuel cells? I mean, I looked it up. There are something like 18,000 cars in California that have fuel cells. Well, that's a pretty small fraction of the total number of cars. So it would be a substantial change in our economy to have hydrogen be an important component to it. So we'll have to get together with business people and economists to even begin to sketch out what it would take in the future to do such a thing.
Yes, that's right.
More work for us.
And that number is not moving up, that 18,000 in California. I remember when it started, it's actually reducing because it's just, the market is not there. It's just not. And the stations are so spread out because there's just so few that there's part.
Tremendous potential. I mean, it's about as efficient as a technology can be and clean.
Very clean.
But
yeah. All right, we're gonna wrap up.
Yeah, we do. So
conversation.
maybe to loop back around on the data centers one, there is, there was a study tasked out to the Public Service Commission by the legislature this year, not specific to data centers, but about large sources of electricity demand located behind the meter. So there's a little bit of overlap there. We'll get the latest on that study process so that the commission understands what research is already going on in the data center question. So we see what our options there are for briefing and for discussion later in the year on that topic. And then we'll follow up on the nuclear and hydrogen infrastructure questions as we work through work plan to-do list for MWG and STWG with the co-chairs.
Okay.
So then we, at this point, would move to public comment. We have a couple of minutes because I believe we have not yet heard any public commenters sign up. So this would be your last chance to do so. Anyone in the room raise your hand or online. We may have a few minutes for the group. Okay, Jeff Silva. So we'll have a public comment from Jeff Silva. So I suggest, Madam Chair, we move to public comment, and then
let's-
if we have a couple minutes at the end.
Yep, let's do that.
Okay, great. So, Mr. Silva, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
We do hear you.
I'd like to, hold on, I'm going to place something in the text. And it's a link to one of your slideshows. All right, there we go. That's, I'd like to comment on. And it's relevant to what you were talking about just today. Thank you very much for the opportunity to give you this public comment. Presented at the Mitigation Working Group on April 24, 2024, the Maryland Department of Transportation gave its climate pollution reduction plan, strategy, evaluation, and implementation slideshow. Its link I placed in the text comment box for the audience to access. In slide number 7, synergies and project types, it shows of all the programs and activities Maryland can perform to reduce its climate transportation, transportation pollution, it is public education and outreach activities that beneficially affect the most types of transportation activities. I'll repeat that statement because transportation is Maryland's main source of climate pollution. Of all the programs and activities Maryland can perform to reduce its transportation climate pollution, it's your public education and outreach activities. Yet, Maryland Commission on Climate Change has not stressed to its audience the necessity of funding the development of climate change mitigation messages to mobilize the public and the distribution of those messages. Why is this failure happening? If climate pollution reduction, public education, and outreach activities would boost the reduction gains in the greatest number of related transportation activities, those same public education and outreach activities will boost reduction gains from the money spent for any other mitigation and adaptation programs. As a member of the Electric Vehicle Association that has been invited by municipalities in Maryland, the District of Columbia, Virginia, and as far away as Maryland to inform the public of its transportation electrification applications and why members of the public should abandon fossil fuel transportation. I see no encouragement from Maryland not funding the climate pollution reduction, public education, and outreach activities. I have even used slideshow material from the Mitigation Working Group to inform my EVA friends during a EVA meeting the estimation of each Marylander's greenhouse gas emission targets by 2031. By the way, if using the projected Maryland population figures, it's a reduction from 20 metric tons of carbon dioxide and its equivalents per person down to 7.5 metric tons per Marylander by 2031. I did so because using just vague percentages, it gives a way for the public just to say, oh, well, it's vague, it's out there. But if you put it down into measurable quantities, then you give the public something to actually target. Now, one other thing, this commission should tell our elected officials to enforce Maryland's transportation article, section 22-402, section C, that limits the idling of vehicle engines as a source of, and it should use that proceeds as a source of revenue to pay for and achieve outreach and education of climate pollution reduction. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I congratulate the new members of all the new working groups, and you'll be hearing from me, and I'll be watching your meetings as well. Thank you. Thanks again. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Okay, so that, if there's no other public comment, that brings us to the end of the agenda today.
Hey, wow. That never happened. I'm afraid to say goodbye. Are you sure?
Well, so the next meeting is September 25th. We are reaching out to schedule, if you haven't already received this, an October meeting, additional meeting in October, which we usually need for extra discussion time of recommendations before we make all the final approvals in November for the annual report. So I just used up one more minute, but we have 9 minutes left. I think this hasn't happened in the commission in years. Enjoy some coffee. This is the summer meeting in between all the business in the fall and recovering from session in the spring. So we have a little bit of space to breathe.
Yes.
So we could open up to the floor or adjourn.
Yeah.
Everyone else. Back
Well, let me open up just quickly. Is there any other comments anyone would like to make before we end? I will say I appreciate the conversation on priorities. We will think about those things and bring it back up. It wasn't a conversation that's going to waste. So thank you. Yeah, we got a couple minutes. Anything, or we're gonna adjourn. All right. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure.
Meeting is adjourned.
September is